Welcome back to another episode of Activista Rise Up. I am your host, Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina. You can listen to this episode in this conversation on all my social media platforms and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. Follow me at Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina. Today, I will speak to an amazing and fierce woman who has a history of fighting for equal pay for women in the workplace, from corporate boards to everywhere in our community and in our workplace. Please join me in welcoming Julene Allen, founder of Women of Color in the Workplace. Julene, thank you so much for joining me today.
Patricia, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on a new show.
I am sort of following on your footsteps because I remember you interviewed me for Conversations for Equal Pay. So I'm turning the chair on you this time around. So thank you. Thank you for accepting it. And I remember that conversation is also on Spotify. So we can find them there. But tell my audience a little bit about yourself. Who Julene Allen is, and how did you begin your career and that led you to becoming an advocate for equal pay for women and for women of color?
Okay. So, a series of experiences transpired in my life. For one, I am very familiar with the challenges that women of color face in the workplace, and I worked in corporate America for a number of years as an insurance professional, and I experienced pretty much everything one could experience pertaining to discrimination, racism at work. I experienced isolation. I went to work every day by myself. Experienced sexual harassment at work. I was bullied. At one point, I did opt out of the workplace, but I returned sometime later, hoping that this new opportunity would be a little bit better. But I definitely felt that this was as good as it was going to get, and that I did not have an opportunity to advance at this company. So eventually, I left the workplace. I had a child, I have a son. At the time, he was very young. So, I decided to stay at home and raise my son. And that was a very rewarding experience, actually. I ended up starting my own business. I was an antique dealer and collector at the time. And so, had I known what I know now, we're having a lot of conversation about what it means to advocate for yourself at work, what it means to have a network, what it means to have mentors and sponsors. Had I known what I know now, then I would have made some different choices. Mm-hmm. And so that eventually led me to, do a number of things. So I started a nonprofit sometime later called Women for Action, and Women for Action was all about interviewing women and telling their stories. And these were like amazing women, under-recognized change makers. And so it was a rewarding experience. It eventually fueled me to want to do more, particularly, when you're interviewing badasses that are like Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina, that fueled me to do more. There was so much more that I can do. So I moved to Ohio, and while I was in Ohio, I knew I needed a network. And so I started a leanin circle then.
Yes.
And so the journey continued. And so leanin, as talked a lot about in his resources about how women can advocate for themselves, how they can build a network, how they can negotiate, and that women must negotiate if they want to go far. Yeah. And so this was new information to me, and so even though Sheryl Sandberg, her and I are so different as far as worlds, it resonated for me because no one had ever said that I can advocate for myself, that I had the ability to make decisions at work. And so I basically grew as a leanin leader. I became a regional leader for leanin. I led the leanin Ohio chapter, a statewide chapter.
Awesome.
And at the time, there was still a gap. I recognized that there was still a gap as far as, leanin and women of color. And we had a low retention rate, and my chapter mirrored other chapters. They also had a low retention rate. Well, they had a low retention rate for women of color. We still, even though I was a Black leader leading this initiative, we still had trouble retaining women of color. And so eventually I put together this proposal, submitted it to leanin, and said, how about this? And so leanin Women of Color was born as a result.
Yes, and that's how you and I first met.
Yes.
Leanin Women of Color. Yes, absolutely.
And so I had the opportunity to work with Procter & Gamble at the time. There was, women of color who were a bit hesitant to adopt. Leanin has a bunch of leanin circles inside different companies. And so we at the time, we prided ourselves in partnering with different companies and helping them to make the workplace more inclusive to women. And at the time, P&G was considering expanding their leanin resources. And so they end up working with me because they had a large demographic of women of color who felt that leanin doesn't necessarily resonate with me. And so they sampled some of our resources. I actually took the time to kind of do some research, talk to different women of color, and we were able to put together resources that, address things like microaggressions, intersectionality, all these things that the workplace needed to know about, that women of color face the concrete ceiling. We don't have the glass ceiling. We face the concrete ceiling. Asian women face the bamboo ceiling.
Yes.
So this was P&G loved the resources, and so then leanin Women of Color expanded. So I spent 5 years facilitating workshops, talking to different women, working with other leanin chapters to explore what it would look like for women of color to advocate for themselves. And we're talking about not just Black women, we're talking about Latinas, Native women, Asian women. They're all facing some unique barrier. I mean, we're hearing about it in the news today. There's a lot of talk about what Asian women are experiencing.
Exactly, yeah.
And so this is what, we want our companies to be aware of. So of course, while working with leanin, I wanted to grow and expand. And so I eventually started my own company. It's new. My company is called Women of Color in the Workplace.
Yes.
And significantly, it was the name was born out of the study and research that leanin does every year. They partner with McKinsey and Company, and they have a study that's called Women in the Workplace. And what that study found was women of color expresses a deeper desire to advance, but they don't have the same access to the senior leaders to open doors for them, or they don't have the same access to opportunities. And this is nothing new to women of color, right? Because, while white women or women overall will apply for certain opportunities when they meet 100% of the qualifications, men will apply when they meet only a portion. So men are hired based on potential, and women are hired based on their history. Now, what do you think is happening to women of color? We know that women of color have to work harder. They have to have more education and more experience to even be considered for even their application to be even reviewed.
I said we have to be triple qualified for a job before we even consider.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so this is, we realized, I realized that there was a particular need. What we're experiencing is so unique. And I'm so passionate about this work, particularly during COVID, the whole social distancing environment. I had the opportunity to kind of take a step back, and we host a number of discussions with different types of women of color who are experiencing in 2020, at the time it was 2020, sexual harassment, bullying, exclusion, isolation. And it's amazing. Big companies still don't have their stuff together.
Yes, exactly.
So we realize that we want women of color to know that their experiences are valid and real. We also want them to be fueled with the education and empowerment, so they're able to go back to work and say, I got everything that it takes to be here. And we want our companies to understand that there are real barriers for particular groups of people. Some of us feel like we can't speak. We don't have a place to speak. We can't take up space.
Yeah.
So,
I think how I connected into the work of leanin women of color and now with women of color in the workplace is this effort that you made to say women of color have different experiences because we have different levels of intersectionality in our experiences at work. Whether you are, Afro-Latina or African-American, or you have an accent when you speak, or you're Latina, and Latinas are sexualized in a way in the workplace. It doesn't matter if it's in the private and the public sector, in which we suffer sexual harassment in a more violent and a more way because it holds us back from being our true self. So I want to commend you for opening that space that, yes, we can lean in, but we sometimes we lean in too far, nobody can catch us. Like we just sort of go over the over the abyss. So I got connected to that work because I began doing a lot of examining of sexual harassment and how do women of color experience it differently. And most of the time when we talk about sexual harassment, is the experience of the white women, usually sometimes how they experience it, and excluding our experience that is more is different, it's more intersectional. And so how do you have those conversations? Because one of the difficult things right now, specifically what's going on in specifically in politics, with the experiences of white women, experiences of harassment get more elevated, get more credibility than the experience of women of color, how they suffer this violence in the workplace. How do we elevate the experience of women of color in the workplace with such a harassment that differentiate that ours is a little more violent in our lives sometimes?
So the research is saying that we're more susceptible, women of color are more susceptible to sexual harassment because sexual harassment is about power. And so we're a likely victim. We're more likely to not report our experiences. We're more reliant on our paycheck than white women. While we don't, women of color in the workplace haven't directly addressed it, but we do know that is a big thing, a big issue, particularly for us at work. We don't have any resources. I'm gonna have to be honest. We don't have any resources on it yet, Patricia, but that is something that we're talking a lot about.
Yeah. One issue also that I have found out, and I do as an academic at the Worker Institute, where I work as my professional career, we have done some surveys that it says that in many cases, because when cases of sexual harassment get elevated in companies or in the workplace, it's usually because a man of color somehow acted inappropriately and that gets highlighted, that sometimes we carry the burden of saying, if I say something perhaps against a man of color and also damaging their career, that also plays a role in how this debate happens. I mean, sexual harassment and gender dynamics existing even in our own cultures, right? We have gender violence in our culture, but in the workplace, I often find that cases again in sexual harassment where a Black man or a Latino man commits the attack or the violence, they get picked up faster than when it's a white man that commits the violence.
I can see that because we particularly, I can't speak for any group, particularly for Black women. We're at a unique, in our community alone, there's a high number of us being victims of things like sexual harassment or abuse or anything of that nature. But then at the same time, we're more likely to be associated with someone that we love, or someone that we love is often the perpetrator, right? So we're in a unique position because there's a certain level of, we feel, loyalty to members of our community. And of course, it is very tricky to want to have to report something like that, particularly in the workplace when a man of color and both a woman of color are both in a vulnerable position. But I would, and it's uncomfortable. I have been there. I would tell you, I have certainly been there. I had to protect myself. I had to protect myself. I come first.
Yes.
And we have to remember that. I come first. And and I deserve to be treated with dignity and respect.
And this is what I, as an advocate, as a women's rights advocate, I always said that this is where clear rules about what's allowed and not allowed in terms of behavior, but also clear expectations and also clear, equal treatment. If somebody fails to comply with the rules, that everybody gets treated the same in a workplace. That is what is needed in order to create the ability for women to speak up and defend themselves, because they have a trust in the system. And I think that's what we're still working on, in clear rules of behavior and clear accountability for those who fail to follow the rules of the law. Sexual harassment is against the law. So, but the accountability is not the same across the board for those who commit it. Yeah.
We don't have to protect perpetrators.
Yes.
We don't have to protect them. And like I said, we've, pretty much every group of women have experienced history of feeling as though we don't have any power and that we've had to put up with stuff. Yeah. Right. And so, there's no better time than now to start pushing back on, that mentality. We're
yes.
we're witnessing it. You can't believe, every time you look up, there's another case.
Yeah.
And so I feel like women of color, it is up to us to push back and make sure that we're treated with respect.
Yeah.
Workplace.
I know that you were in corporate America, you left it and started your own company, and then began this path towards engaging women in these conversations. Have you seen a shift on how women talk about pushing for equal pay or pushing for accountability on issues around, workplace violence? So have you seen a progress in how women address those issues? I know that you have talked to many women since you left corporate America. So what's the shift that you have seen in that work?
So we also do research, women of color in the workplace, and amazingly, some of our research is kind of conflicting what I've what we've witnessed, what we've seen happening with women in the workplace, leanin study. And I'm wondering, it may have a lot to do with the education that's out there. A lot of women of color are saying that they have sponsors. And that was just amazing. That was amazing. I don't have the data in front of me right now, but a lot of women of color are saying that they have mentorship and they have sponsorship at work. So I'm definitely seeing that shift. But amazingly, we just hosted a workshop last month. The workshop was Conquering the Concrete Ceiling. We addressed the concrete ceiling and different types of biases that are common to all groups of women of color. And you still have people that don't believe that there's a pay gap.
Yes, yes, there's still those folks. Yes.
And I'm telling them, this research, we prepared it earlier on. This research is by the Institute for Women in Policy Research, and then we provided background on who the Institute for Women in Policy Research is, and because we knew that we were going to get some pushback or people saying like that's not a legitimate organization. So you'd be amazed when you hear people say that there is no pay gap, and they actually challenge the fact that there is one.
Unbelievable, yeah.
And they may say, "Oh, it's illegal to pay people differently," and I'm like, "You're kidding me, right?" So we prepared the information ahead of time in this workshop, and we informed them this information is from the Institute for Women Policy and Research. And here's some background information on this organization, because we knew someone at some point was going to ask.
Yeah. So I know that some of these conversations, you can find them on Spotify, Conversations for Equal Pay. And I have heard some of them, and the conversations are so inspirational. What is one conversation that you remember that inspired you, and it was that you can think of that you can share with the audience?
Well, I always remember our conversation, and one particular thing, one thing you do inspire me, Patricia. You were probably one of my most, I won't say probably, you were one of the most inspiring interviews. And one thing I always remember is when you talked a lot about having an accent, and how this woman had came to you after some event that you held, and you inspired her.
Yes.
And so, I was having a conversation with my colleague recently, because she's my partner, she's an Asian woman. And we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about how, workshops or experiences we've had when people spoke up, and women would actually feel shy about speaking because they may have an accent. And so what does that mean exactly? People would, the perception is that they don't know anything, right? Or they're not intelligent. And so we're missing out on, really bright and brilliant women who can contribute. But a lot of times it may be something simple, like they may not speak up at a table because they have an accent. And when you talked, when you said that, I was like, you go. Because it, and you could feel the fierceness, you have such a fierceness about yourself. And we talked about Jersey women.
Yes. Yes. I feel it right in when I came to Jersey.
So yeah, Jersey definitely has this thing going, and I love the coalition that you guys have there.
Yeah. Well, I always feel that that when you live on your truth, and you talked about this, when you practice your truth and you are certain that you're doing what you love, I think that comes true in the work that you do and how you practice it. And I've seen that on you, because we come from two different backgrounds, you from corporate America and me from the labor movement. But I feel like we sort of are kindred spirits, because we sort of have lived in our truth in advancing the voices of women of color, wherever we're at. So I also find you as an inspiration. And I wanted to bring your story to my listeners because it doesn't matter where we find ourselves, whether you're in the corporate boardrooms or you're in politics or you're in the nonprofit or you're a union leader or you're a worker in the front line. I think that we all have the potential to be leaders and to advance something that we care about, which like to create a future that embraces whole self. So I wanted to say that because you have inspired me as well to continue to speak about women and what equality means for us in the workplace, wherever that is. I want to talk to, I don't know if you're tracking the impact that COVID-19 is having on the ability of women to achieve equal pay or to achieve equality in the workplace. Have you done any work on that? Because I see a lot of articles about how women suffer the greatest level of unemployment, but also we're doing 3-4 jobs now that some of us have to work from home and take care of our children and our parents. So have you followed what impact that is having on the ability of women to achieve equal pay?
So yes, we have had a series of conversations, particularly last year. One, what we started to do during COVID was really just pause a lot of our activities. And we hosted weekly conversations just to provide a space where women can vent and really just talk about what they were going through. Some, amazingly, were saying that they were very happy because they shaved off some time in the morning. We also talked a lot about, how women can support one another, particularly women of color during this time, because we're shouldering the burden of having to homeschool our children. Some of us are still doing that.
Yes.
Having to still perform at work and just really finding ways to build community around, other moms who are going through the same experiences and attempting to support one another so we're not going through this alone, and even establishing ways to co-parent. So maybe Mary today will take the kids and maybe Anna tomorrow will take the children. So we stress working together. That was some of the ways that we also talked a lot about, be conscious and aware that there are going to be companies that are, for those of you that are transitioning or changing positions, there are going to be companies that are going to attempt to offer you less because you're working virtual. And there was some experiences like that. And to push back on that and say no.
So I am glad to hear you set up this forum for women to have these conversations, because one of the things that I have found working from home is that as much as I love having that extra time that I don't have to commute, I also feel like we're working more and the days are longer and we're a bit isolated.
Yeah.
And not having those side conversations with your friends at work sort of doesn't allow for that relationship building that like creates escape for us. So I'm glad to hear that kind of that forum that you have provided for it. But I know there's so much more we need to do to be able to track the real impact of this pandemic on women. But tell me, I know that you did something special for yourself as a professional during this pandemic. You went back to something that inspires you, right? You went back to doing some of your art. Mm-hmm. So can you tell me a little bit about that, how that holds you together, and tell us a little bit about your art and your art studio?
So yeah, I've I shied away from just really making art a profession. One, there is this idea that you can't make money as an artist, and you can. And two, just I think particularly for women of color, we sometimes feel that, we want to be taken serious. And so So art was not something that I really wanted to dive into initially, even though over the years I continued to paint. And I took a number of classes to develop, to grow as an artist. And so during the social distancing initially, I just reflected, just took a step back and just said, this is maybe something that I really want to think about exploring. I got a bunch of time on my hands.
Yeah.
So I might as well. So I started just researching things about, I came across something called flipping furniture. There's flipping property and then there's flipping furniture. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yes.
And so I was kind of doing that already. I would go to estate sales or thrift stores. I would purchase a piece of furniture and repaint it, put artwork on it. And I, took a number of workshops, and my business, Revamp This, was born out of that.
Awesome.
Not only do I paint, I paint portraits of, I particularly enjoy painting portraits of women. I'm a big fan of women who've made a mark on our world. So I have a number of paintings to hallmark or to commemorate those women. So not only do I paint, I also revamp furniture. So I ended up moving to Indianapolis. I found out Indianapolis was one of the top 10 places in the country that was for Black women, a viable city where Black women could live. I started doing apartment search, found a community that was specifically for artists, and here I'm now in this community. I'm growing, finishing up, decorating my studio. I have literally been just growing myself. I mean, I've caulked my kitchen sink and refinished my bathroom sink.
That's awesome. I'm sure your house is like another studio. Yes. We should take a tour next time. I've got the camera and I can see your art. Yeah. I think I visited your website. Can you tell our audience your website and how they can find some of your art?
So my website is revampthis.com. I am literally slowly uploading things to my Etsy store. So, over the next few weeks, I'll be uploading more items. I do a number of things, like I revamp lamps, planters. I mean, you name it. Like, if you can, basically I find ways to revamp any kind of thing.
Well, I love that because sometimes I love going to antique shops and finding places that something that looks old sort of fits into with modern furniture and it just looks nice and chic. So I can just imagine having that ability to like redo them and redecorate, which is an art. I remember I go to some places sometimes and I see like, oh, that's the table, looks like the one my grandmother had in her kitchen in El Salvador. Like, I wish I could just grab it and bring it over to my home. So thank you for repurposing, which this is something that we're doing now. So tell me, so what is next for, what are you looking to achieve with women in the workplace, women of color in the workplace right now?
So we are keeping the conversation going regarding the pay gap that is impacting women of color. Every year, we hear of the same. It never really changes. The pay gap is wider for women of color. It's wider for particularly some groups more than others. Latinas, as we know. I think it's 54 cents.
Yes, and the dollar
to the dollar that non-Hispanic white male makes. And so we host a number of workshops, equal pay day workshops throughout the year to have a series of conversations to create awareness about the pay gap. And also we're working with companies. We're also working with companies to address some of their issues inside the workplace to help further their diversity and inclusion mission. We want to educate women, and particularly women in senior leadership, and let them know that it is critical to reach back and support other women, to make sure that you're leaving the door open for others. You know, we're still seeing like some of these big companies, their top 3 spots, C spots are white men. And I feel like it's so necessary, Patricia, because, you know, I don't want some little girl who's growing up today, aspiring to be president or wherever it is she's aspiring to do, to have to go through the same thing that we went through, right? Yeah. And I feel like if we've had these experiences and we know that it's still messed up, it is our job to make sure that we're making sure this world is much better for them. Yeah. And so that's what we're attempting to do. We're attempting to educate and make sure that women are empowered.
Yeah, I know that somebody coined the sentence 54 cents is nonsense for Latinas. Yes. And it's really nonsense that at this point in age, we're still fighting for, policies that could get us to getting full access to equal pay. But I want to elevate what you said about the need for women to open doors for other women in the C-suites or in any job, and so that young women can aspire to be, at the top in charge. And now we have a Vice President Harris that is a model for women, that we can actually be in charge and be Vice President of the United States and one day president. But we also need to have women in the C-suites, and women as president of universities, and women as president of non-profit boards of everywhere, so that we can create those spaces for other women. So any tips that you can give to other women that are just entering corporate America or entering any workplace, that could help them be more proactive in demanding equal pay or equality in the workplace?
I would give tips to particularly little girls, because they say that the pay gap starts as early as 16, but I would say 14, because that's when we start working our first job for most of us, particularly women of color.
Yes.
I would say to little girls, it is okay for you to negotiate your pay. And if you're working at McDonald's or, some store in the mall, advocate for yourself, right? Because it continues to grow, and it gets harder and harder as we mature and we advance, and we're finally, 22 or 24 when we're in our first professional job. It gets harder and harder. So I would say to little girls that, don't be afraid to negotiate your salary.
Yeah. What is one thing that you had learned about yourself through this path that you've been on to become an advocate for women in the workplace, from when you were in the workplace? What have you learned about yourself and your own path to leadership?
I would say that, I don't know if you know that I struggled with communication early on. I had a handicap. I still do. I stutter. I stuttered. I suffer from social phobia. Wow. And I grew over the years. I just pushed myself. I pushed myself in certain situations. I practiced and prepared because I knew that I had to do that. And that would make that space a lot more comfortable for me, and I would perform better. I would say that, I've learned that you can come out of a barrier, like an individual barrier. You can come out of that. If you continue to work hard, you can become more confident and you can become stronger. And so I'm very proud of that growth. I'm still growing. And I don't know.
Well, I want to say that you are an excellent communicator. You're an excellent interviewer. I would have never known that that was a phobia that you had to be leading these discussions. I think that's an inspiration to others who, that you can come overcome whatever physical impediment you have, and that there's a way to do that. So thank you for the inspiration to that. You're also a mom. You said your son is going to college now, or?
Yes, he's a senior in college.
Good. Almost out. So I'm sure he's very proud of you as a leader and as an artist.
Yeah, he's majoring in economics. I'm very proud. He stuck with it. At one point, he wanted to change his major. Yeah, and I feel like I'm so fortunate. Kids make us, they help us grow. And so I feel like, I'm so fortunate to have a son like my son, because I grew a lot. I remember my mother saying when I was younger, like, you're so, I think all parents think that their kids are selfish. So,
yes, they do. And we think the same of our kids at some point.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because you don't get that phone call until they want something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, my kids are 10 years old, but I always tell them, you don't realize all the stuff that I do for you, but they're sweethearts. And I know that they're going to become fine men. I am so happy to hear that your son is going to be an economist. I mean, we need more economists of color too, to be able to be part of defining what our society is going to move forward. So congratulations on that. Congratulations on your art studio. And I'm gonna be perusing to see what I can find there. And congratulations on the work that you have done to elevate the story of women in the workplace. And I invite everyone here to visit the conversations on equal pay on Spotify, and to visit your website. How can people stay in touch with you and your work at Women of Color in the Workplace?
So you can log on to womenofcolorintheworkplace.com. It's spelled just exactly how it's said. Also, LinkedIn, we have a very active and busy LinkedIn page. So you can also follow us on LinkedIn at Women of Color in the Workplace.
Yes. We had to have men as allies. So next time we talk, we're going to build on that. How do we work so that men can become allies in this fight? Thank you so much, Julene, for joining me and for continuing this so important discussion about equality in the workplace.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. Through Julene's story, we have learned that we can come into activism from anywhere we are, from corporate America to your community. If you have an issue that you care about, please find a way to bring your passion and encourage others to join. Equal pay for women is a real issue, and there are campaigns all through the year to elevate the need for equal pay for Latinas, for equal pay for African American women, and equal pay for Asian American women. The fight for equality in the workplace begins with equal pay. It continues with efforts to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace and to achieve leadership positions for women. Join us in that struggle. And if you are committed to equality in the workplace, join the movement for equal pay and join the community of Activista Rise Up. I am Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina. Please follow me on all my social media platforms and listen to this podcast on Spotify and all podcast platforms. Thank you.